in the giant Tokyo Metropolitan Gymnasium, something amazing was about to happen. The lights above shone brightly, bouncing off polished wooden floors. Thousands of people filled the seats, buzzing with excitement. Everyone had come to see the International Martial Arts Expo, a huge celebration of discipline, tradition, and respect. At the center of it all, a wise old karate master was preparing to show a kata. A kata is not just a random set of moves. It is like a living story told with the body, a series of kicks, punches, blocks, and turns, all flowing together like music. For this master, the kata was not just practice. It was the work of a lifetime. Every move carried the weight of decades of training. But what was supposed to be a calm and respectful demonstration began to change the moment Steven Seagal laughed. The sound was small at first, but in the quiet arena, it seemed loud. His laugh bounced off the walls like a stone hitting still water. People turned their heads in surprise. Why was he laughing? Didn't he know this was a serious moment? And there, standing proudly, was Jason Statham. Jason Statham was not an ordinary old man. For decades, he had been one of the greatest martial artists alive. He had won the World Karate Championship 8 times in a row. He had served in the U.S. Air Force, learning martial arts when he was stationed in Korea in the 1950s. He even created his own fighting system called Chun-Kuk-Do, built not just on strong punches and powerful kicks, but also on discipline, humility, and respect. To Jason, martial arts was not just about fighting. It was about character. It was about how a person carried themselves in life. It was about winning against your own anger and ego before trying to win against someone else. When Steven Seagal stepped forward, full of pride, demanding a real fight, he had no idea that Jason Statham was a man who had turned restraint into a weapon. Inside the gymnasium, the atmosphere was almost like a storm waiting to break. People filled every seat, leaning forward, whispering, waiting. The energy in the room felt like electricity in the air before lightning strikes. Huge colorful banners hung from the ceiling, banners of karate, judo, aikido, taekwondo. Each banner represented hundreds of years of history. Each one reminded the audience that martial arts were not just fighting. They were cultures, philosophies, and legacies. Around the edges of the floor, camera crews crouched with their heavy lenses, ready to capture every move, every reaction, every expression. Big screens hung high so even people in the back rows could see every detail on stage. Then the announcer, Riku Yamamoto, stepped forward. Riku was an older man with a strong voice that had introduced countless martial arts events. He leaned into the microphone and spoke with the calm weight of experience. Ladies and gentlemen, the International Martial Arts Expo welcomes you to this celebration of discipline, respect, and mastery. For 3 days, we gather here to honor traditions that have shaped warriors and peacekeepers alike. His words carried through the air, and the audience grew quiet, listening. But while most of the crowd listened with respect, one man sat in the front row with his arms crossed, dressed entirely in black. His dark-tinted glasses hid his eyes, even though they were indoors. His hair was tied back in a ponytail that bobbed slightly whenever he moved. This was Steven Seagal. At 57 years old, he was no longer in his Hollywood prime, but he still carried himself with the same confidence that had made him famous. Around him sat his followers and fans, eager to copy his every gesture. "Did you see his last movie?" one young fan whispered. "Yeah," said another. "He beat up 20 guys without even breaking a sweat, and I heard he doesn't even use stunt doubles." Seagal's lips curled into a tiny smirk. He had heard the whispers. He loved the whispers. Behind his dark glasses, his eyes were sharp. They didn't wander lazily. No, they were measuring, hunting, calculating, like a predator waiting for the right moment. But not far away, 3 rows behind Seagal, sat a much older man. His name was Master Harada, a living legend of karate. He was 80 years old, his skin wrinkled, his hands resting gently on his wooden cane. Unlike the restless audience, Master Harada sat perfectly still. His breathing was slow, his face calm, his mind completely centered. Where others saw only a demonstration, he saw the deeper truth. He could sense the tension in the air. He could feel the storm coming. Meanwhile, backstage, Jason Statham tied the belt of his white karate uniform. His hands moved slowly and carefully, as if even this small act was part of his kata. At 79 years old, his movements were deliberate, but there was no weakness in them. They were controlled, precise, fluid. A young assistant approached him. "5 minutes, Mr. Statham," the boy said, bowing with respect. Jason smiled kindly, his eyes crinkling. "Thank you," he said warmly. Then he closed his eyes and breathed deeply, centering himself. The kata he would perform was called Kasenku, one of the most complex in karate. It contained 43 movements that shifted between defense and attack, between balance and speed. To outsiders, it might look like a show, but to Jason, every move was a lesson. It was about control, patience, and harmony. A young American fighter backstage leaned closer. "You know who's out there, right? Seagal. He's been talking all morning. Says traditional martial arts are nothing but museum pieces." Jason didn't even flinch. "Everyone is entitled to their opinion," he said calmly. "But I'm not here for him. I'm here to honor the art." The young fighter shook his head. "Man, I don't know how you stay so calm. If someone disrespected me like that." Jason placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "The first fight you need to win," he said gently, "is against your own ego. Everything else follows from there." The younger man blinked, quiet now, as if he had just learned a lesson far more important than throwing a punch. Then Riku's voice boomed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce a true legend of martial arts, a man who has dedicated his life to discipline and respect. Please welcome 8-time world karate champion, founder of Chun Kook Do, Jason Statham." The crowd roared. Jason stepped out under the bright lights. His white gi shone crisp and clean. He bowed deeply to the audience, then to Master Harada and the senior practitioners. Finally, he bowed to the space itself, the sacred ground where martial arts lived. As the applause faded, Jason stood silently in the center. His breathing slowed, his eyes focused. His stillness alone commanded respect. And then a Jasonal. It came from the front row. Steven Seagal leaned over to his companion, smirking, making a quiet comment. But in the hushed arena, even a Jasonal sounded loud. Heads turned. Some frowned. Some whispered. Jason gave no sign he heard. He began his kata. Each movement flowed into the next, like water over stones. His strikes were sharp, but not reckless. His blocks were firm, but not forceful. Every motion carried the weight of decades of training. The camera zoomed in, showing the subtle shifts of his feet, the perfect angles of his arms, the controlled focus in his eyes. On the big screens, the audience could see every detail. Halfway through, Jason led again, this time louder. He leaned toward his companion and whispered something. The friend laughed nervously, glancing around. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. Still, Jason didn't break focus. His breathing stayed steady. His kata reached the heart of sequence, a fast, complex mix of turns, blocks, and strikes that demanded perfect balance. He moved through it flawlessly, finishing with a strong final block. Then he stood still again, bowing deeply. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. People leapt to their feet, clapping and shouting. But Seagal and his group remained seated, arms crossed, smirks fixed. Jason bowed once more to Master Harada, who nodded in quiet respect. But just as Riku was stepping forward to thank him, another voice cut through the applause. "If I may." Steven Seagal was walking toward the stage. He reached for Riku's microphone. The announcer hesitated, but Jason gave a small nod, allowing it. Seagal stepped slightly in front of Jason, a move every martial artist in the room noticed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Seagal said smoothly, "what we just saw was impressive." His tone was cold, dripping with insincerity. Impressive the way museum pieces are impressive. Nice to look at. Historical, but useless in the real world. The crowd gasped. Murmurs filled the hall. Jason stayed calm, expression unchanged. Seagal continued, "Let's be honest. These old forms are just choreography. Pretty dances. In a real fight, they'd fail. Real combat is about effectiveness, about what works when your life is on the line." He turned toward Jason, smirking. "With all due respect, Mr. Statham, Maybe it's time to move on from outdated methods. Gasps spread. Some people booed. Others cheered. The arena was splitting in two. Rick tried to step forward, but Seagal pulled away, holding the mic tight. In fact, he said, his eyes glinting, I'd be happy to show the difference. The audience roared. Phones rose, cameras rolling. Social media was already exploding. All eyes turned to Jason Statham. Jason stood still, breathing calm. After a pause, he held out his hand for the microphone. Seagal hesitated, then gave it over with a mocking flourish. The floor is yours, old-timer. Jason's eyes never left Seagal. Thank you for your perspective, he said softly. In my 50 years of martial arts, I've learned that different methods serve different purposes. Traditional forms teach discipline, precision, and respect, values that last beyond fighting. Some people in the crowd cheered. Master Harada nodded in approval. As for effectiveness, Jason went on, the proof is not in boasting or flashy shows. The proof is in the character martial arts builds. It's about mastering yourself before you try to master others. The crowd clapped again, but Seagal frowned. That's pretty, Seagal interrupted. But the truth is, those dances get you killed in real fights. I've trained police. I've trained the military. I've used my methods in real combat. Can you say the same, old man? The audience gasped loudly. Some shouted in anger, others shouted in support. The arena was alive with noise. Ricker rushed in. Gentlemen, please. This is a celebration, not a fight. Seagal smiled coldly. Oh, it's a celebration of truth. And the truth is, the people deserve to see which method really works. Isn't that right? He turned to the crowd. Half the audience shouted yes, the other half booed. The air was thick with tension. Tradition versus spectacle, respect versus ego. Jason handed the microphone back. I did not come here for confrontation. I came to honor the art. If Mr. Seagal wants to demonstrate, I will step aside. Seagal blinked, caught off guard. He expected anger. Instead, he was met with humility. For a moment, doubt flickered across his face. Then he forced his smirk back. No, he said quickly. I don't want the stage to myself. I want a direct comparison. You and me. Right here. Right now. The arena exploded. Cheers. Gasps. Shouts. Phone recording. Social media feeds lighting up. Rika looked panicked. The organizers at the side of the stage whispered urgently. Nobody had expected this. Then, slowly, Master Harada stood. The old man pushed himself up with his cane. The movement was small, but it sent ripples through the crowd. As the oldest master present, as a living connection to karate's early days, his very standing brought silence. The arena went quiet, and Master Harada spoke. Mr. Seagal, in my 80 years of life, I have seen something again and again. The people who shout the loudest about how great or strong they are usually the ones who feel the weakest inside. They want to prove themselves to everyone, because deep down, they are not sure of themselves. That's why Master Harada, an old and wise martial arts teacher, spoke up in front of the big crowd. His English had a strong accent, but his words were sharp and clear like a sword. He said calmly, true mastery needs no bragging. Real skill does not need to shout. It shows itself. His words flew through the air and hit like arrows. Steven Seagal, the tall American actor and martial artist, stood on the stage with his sunglasses on. He always carried himself like a star, like someone who wanted the world to see how important he was. But when Master Harada spoke, Seagal's jaw got tight, and his face turned red like a fire climbing up his neck. With respect, Master Harada, Seagal replied. Keeping martial arts stuck in old ways makes people think it doesn't matter today. I'm trying to make it modern. I'm trying to bring it into today's world. The words carried pride, but also challenge. Master Harada did not lose his calm. He lifted one eyebrow, his face relaxed but sharp. His small gesture felt like a giant spotlight, shining directly on Seagal. Everyone saw the challenge hidden inside those eyes. The audience, who filled the Tokyo Metropolitan Gymnasium, began whispering. Some people even Jason led softly, unable to hide their amusement at the old master's clever words. Steven Seagal's smile cracked. His carefully built image was breaking apart, piece by piece. In front of everyone, his sunglasses no longer hid the truth. Anger was boiling inside him. Perhaps, Harada said softly, the expo would benefit if Mr. Seagal showed his demonstration now, as planned. Then the people can see both ways, his way and ours, and decide for themselves. It was a clever answer. Harada didn't fight. He gave Seagal the stage, but also made sure it wasn't about ego. Riku, the announcer and host of the event, quickly stepped forward. His voice boomed from the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Steven Seagal, here to show his unique style of Aikido. The crowd clapped and cheered, but Steven Seagal didn't move. He stayed frozen, standing tall, his pride like a wall. That's not what I want, he said coldly. His voice cut through the noise. The people want to see us settle this directly. Unless, he turned toward Jason Statham, who had been sitting quietly. Unless you are not confident in your old, traditional methods. The insult was sharp and mean. It was like calling someone a coward without using the word. Jason Statham's students and fans shouted back immediately. They defended their master's honor. Some stood, fists raised. Others yelled, "Show him, Jason." The gymnasium filled with noise, louder and louder, like a storm. Jason Statham sat quietly, his blue eyes calm but thoughtful. He looked at the crowd, their faces excited, their phones up to record, their voices demanding a fight. He sighed and sighed. This wasn't what martial arts was about. Martial arts were about discipline, respect, learning, and control. Not about pride, not about entertainment. But he also knew something else. If he stood up and walked away now, people would think karate, his art, his tradition, was weak. They would say it couldn't stand up to modern challenges. So he leaned closer to Riku and spoke softly, though the microphone caught his words. Maybe the problem isn't martial arts, Jason whispered. Maybe the problem is how people see it today. Riku nodded sadly. He understood, but his hands were tied. The crowd was already chanting loudly, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" Steven Seagal stood tall, arms crossed, smirking back on his face. He thought he had trapped Jason. "I didn't come here to fight, Mr. Seagal," Jason said calmly. "I came here to show the values and techniques of traditional karate. And I'm offering you the chance to prove they actually work." Seagal replied quickly, pouncing on his words. "Unless they don't." It was a simple trap. If Jason said no, he would look scared. If he said yes, he would break his own rule of not fighting for pride. Jason looked across the arena to Master Harada. The old man gave a small nod, but that nod was filled with meaning. It said, "Sometimes, to protect tradition, you must leave your comfort zone. Sometimes, you must face the storm." Jason nodded back. "Very well," he said firmly. "Not a fight. A demonstration. We compare our approaches. No hurting, no anger. Only showing principles." The crowd erupted with cheers and stomping feet. They wanted this. Riku shouted over the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, an unscheduled special demonstration. Jason Statham versus Steven Seagal." But his words were drowned by the thunder of the crowd. Seagal's smirk widened. He took off his long, black leather jacket and handed it to one of his helpers. Underneath, he wore a black Aikido GI top. He had come prepared for this moment all along. "No intent to injure," Seagal agreed aloud, though the look in his eyes showed something else. "Just education." Assistants rushed forward, clearing the stage. The wooden floor gleamed under the bright lights. The arena, moments ago a stage for friendly demonstrations, now felt like a battlefield. Jason stood quietly in his white karate GI, calm, centered, like a mountain. Seagal stretched his shoulders with dramatic flair, as if he were already in a movie. He lifted his hands into Aikido's open palm stance, circling slowly. The crowd fell into a heavy silence, holding their breath. Riku, unsure how to guide the moment, said, "For those just joining us, we are witnessing something special, an unplanned demonstration between two martial arts legends. Jason Statham, representing traditional karate, and Steven Seagal, representing his modern Aikido style. Please remember, this is an exhibition, not a fight." But everyone knew it felt more like a battle. Seagal smirked again. Traditional first, he called out. Show us what these old ways can do. Jason remained still. Martial arts are not for showing off, he said evenly. They are for responding wisely to what comes. Then respond to this. Seagal barked. He lunged forward, fast for his size, with an open hand strike aimed at Jason's chest. The audience gasped. But when Seagal's hand reached forward, Jason was gone. He hadn't jumped or spun dramatically. He had only shifted slightly, stepping aside just enough that the strike hit empty air. Many in the audience didn't even see how it happened. One moment Seagal was about to hit. The next moment his hand cut through nothing. Seagal stumbled forward slightly, caught himself, then laughed with exaggerated humor. Nice dodge. Very traditional. But you can't just run away forever. Sometimes, Jason said calmly, the smartest move is no move at all. The crowd murmured in approval. The old master's wisdom touched many hearts. Seagal rolled his eyes. Tell that to someone trying to smash your head in. He attacked again, this time with a jab and a circular grab, the kind of move meant to control an opponent's body. But again, Jason moved just enough. He shifted his arm slightly, turned his body at the right angle, and Seagal's grab slipped away like water through fingers. No wasted motion, no flashy counter, just perfect timing. The martial artists in the audience nodded in respect. They understood. Seagal frowned. He had expected Jason to either fail or show off. Instead, Jason's quiet efficiency made him look clumsy. Seagal attacked harder, trying combinations, feints, and Aikido grips. This time, he even caught Jason's collar and sleeve. See, Seagal announced loudly, turning to the crowd. Traditional ways leave you open. I control him now. But before he could demonstrate, Jason shifted his weight just a little. It was almost invisible. Seagal's balance broke. His grip loosened. Jason stepped calmly back into position. Tradition teaches us something simple, Jason explained softly. Position comes first. When your position is correct, you don't need much strength. The martial artists in the crowd clapped quietly. Master Harada smiled faintly, his eyes shining with approval. Seagal's face hardened. His show was slipping away. He wasn't smiling now. Enough philosophy, he said darkly. Let's make this real. And then he attacked with full speed. Aikido techniques flew one after another. Entries, grabs, throws, all with real force. But Jason met him calmly. He blocked wrist locks before they formed. He shifted weight to ruin throws. He guided Seagal's momentum harmlessly past. He never struck, never showed anger. He simply neutralized everything. To untrained eyes, it looked like they were cooperating. But to martial artists, it was clear. Jason was shutting Seagal down at every step, using half the energy. Seagal started panting, his movements rougher, angrier. His smooth flow was gone. Frustration showed. This isn't real. Seagal shouted suddenly, stepping back. In a real fight, techniques are applied with full power, not this fake stuff. Jason stood silent, calm, his hands relaxed at his sides. Riku, sensing danger, quickly jumped in. Maybe now, both masters can explain their principles. That would help the audience. The principle is simple. Seagal barked. Real combat isn't pretty. It's not about tradition, forms, or spirit. It's about ending threats fast. Everything else is just dancing. The crowd split in reaction. Some nodded, some booed. Half agreed, half didn't. The division became clear. Was martial arts about fighting only, or about personal growth? Then, Master Harada's voice cut through the noise. He had stood once more, tall despite his age. His voice carried authority. Perhaps, he said, this would be clearer with weapons. He pointed to wooden training weapons on the side. Wooden swords, staffs, wooden knives. Wooden weapons show mistakes clearly, Harada explained. No injuries, but no hiding. Every error becomes obvious. Jason bowed deeply. A wise suggestion. I accept. The crowd turned to Seagal. His face grew cautious. He hesitated, but then forced a smile. Of course. Weapons are my specialty. The crowd cheered again as helpers brought the weapons forward. Jason chose a wooden Joe staff, simple, straight, about 4 feet long, a symbol of defense and versatility. Seagal chose a wooden Bakken sword, a weapon for striking, sharp even in training. The choice spoke volumes. The choice spoke volumes. They returned to the center. Lights gleamed on polished wood. The arena grew silent again. Master Harada nodded approvingly. Sometimes, he thought, the best way forward is to return to basics. Jason and Seagal faced each other once more. Time seemed to roll backward. They weren't celebrities now. They were just martial artists, about to share an ancient dialogue with wood and movement. Center yourselves, Master Harada called softly from the side. Remember, the weapon is an extension of your principles, not a replacement for them. And so the true test was about to begin. Seagal held his Bakken sword tight in both hands. The Bakken was heavy, but it felt like an old friend to him. He had used it for so many years that its weight felt normal. He liked the feeling of the wood, strong and smooth, ready to cut the air. When he lifted it, the weapon almost felt alive, like it wanted to move. Across from him, Jason stood tall and calm. In his hands was the Joe staff, a long wooden stick. Jason did not hold it high or low, but right in the middle. This way, he could move it in any direction, up, down, left, or right, without delay. It was balanced, like Jason himself. His face showed no fear, no nervousness. His eyes were steady, focused on Seagal. Their eyes met. Seagal's look was sharp, challenging, full of pride. It seemed to say, I will show you my strength. I will prove I am the best. Jason's look was different. His eyes were calm, gentle but firm. His look seemed to say, I am ready. I do not need to prove anything. I just need to show the truth. Both men had lived their whole lives in martial arts. They had spent decades practicing, teaching, fighting, and learning. They sweated in training halls, bowed to masters, repeated moves thousands of times. Yet their paths were not the same. Seagal's way was about power, speed, and control. Jason's way was about balance, patience, and timing. And now, after so many years, their paths had crossed in a way neither expected. This meeting was not just about who had better moves. It was about who had become the better human being through their martial arts. The audience felt this, even if they could not explain it. Something important was about to happen. The wooden floor of the big training hall seemed to shrink as the two men faced each other. It was as if the whole world had narrowed down to this moment. Just Seagal, Jason, and their weapons. The Bakken in Seagal's hands gleamed under the bright lights. He lifted it high above his head, preparing for a classic stance. This was the Kesajiri stance, used to cut diagonally in one strong motion. He was ready to strike hard. Jason's Joe was lower, held straight like a line to the ground. His stance was wide but relaxed, balanced like a mountain. His body was ready to move any way, but he did not rush. The difference between them was clear. Seagal looked like a storm about to burst. Jason looked like still water, calm but deep. Master Harada, an old and wise martial arts teacher, stood at the edge of the space. He raised his hand. Everyone watching grew silent. Then he lowered his hand slowly. Hajime, he said softly. Begin. Everyone thought Seagal would move first, and he did. He stepped forward quickly, faster than many expected from such a big man. The Bakken cut through the air with a whistle, moving down in a powerful diagonal strike. His technique was clean, sharp, and full of force. This was not just for show. It was real sword art, learned from years of training. Jason did not panic. He did not fight power with power. Instead, he stepped to the side, out of the direct line of attack. At the same time, he twisted Joe in his hands. The end of the staff rose up, just enough to meet the Bakken. He didn't block it hard. He only guided it slightly away. Crack! The two wooden weapons met. The sound echoed across the hall. The crowd gasped. But this was not like a movie where fighters push and lock weapons together. No, it was quick and simple. Jason's move was small but perfect. The Bakken was pushed just enough to miss. And Jason now stood in a better position than before. Seagal did not stop. He quickly swung again. This time a horizontal slash. It was smooth and professional. Again, Jason answered with calm. A tiny move of his staff, a little shift of his feet, and the attack passed by harmlessly. Seagal frowned. He wanted more. He spoke loud enough for the audience to hear. You're only defending. That's what old martial arts are all about. Reacting, not starting. All reaction, no action. He thrust the bakken forward suddenly, aiming for Jason's stomach. It was fast, sharper than before. Many in the audience thought Jason might be hit this time. But no. Jason spun the Joe in a circle and knocked the bakken off course. At the same time, the move shook Seagal's balance. He had to take a half step back to steady himself. Being first is not the same as winning, Jason said calmly, his voice even. Sometimes, being first means making your opponent move the wrong way. People in the audience whispered to each other. Some smiled. This was not the flashy fight they had imagined, but something deeper. Martial artists in the crowd nodded. They understood. This was not just fighting. It was a conversation made with movement. Seagal was not happy. He attacked again, harder and faster. His bakken spun and cut from many angles, left, right, high, low. His body moved smoothly, showing he was a true master. He was no longer demonstrating. He was trying to prove his way was stronger. Jason's Joe spun more now too. He blocked, redirected, moved, and stepped carefully. He did not waste energy. Each small move did 2 or 3 things at once. He was like a man solving a puzzle with patience. Seagal tried to crush it with power. Jason answered with patience and timing. From the edge, Master Harada watched with wise eyes. He saw the truth. Seagal's style was about control, power, and finishing things quickly. Jason's style was about calmness, position, and using little energy for big results. 2 different paths, 2 different philosophies. The audience grew very quiet. At first, they wanted excitement. Now they felt something else, respect. Even people who knew nothing about martial arts could feel it. They were seeing something real. 2 masters speaking with their bodies. After a while, Seagal stepped back. He was breathing hard, sweat on his face. Still, he smirked and said, "Not bad for traditional style. But defense only takes you so far. You have to attack sometime." Jason breathed slow and calm, his voice gentle. Attacking is not the only way to engage. There are many ways. Seagal's eyes narrowed. In real life, fights end when someone takes decisive action. He lowered into another stance. "Let me show you." Then Seagal showed his best. He moved beautifully, like water flowing. The bakken seemed to be part of his body. Cuts became thrusts, thrusts became cuts. Each strike led to the next in a chain of attacks. It was powerful, smooth, and deadly. But Jason was ready. His Joe always met the bakken in the right spot, at the right time. He blocked, redirected, controlled. The 2 men moved faster and faster. The sound of wood hitting would fill the hall. The rhythm was like music, sharp and strong. For almost a minute they danced across the floor. Attack, block, cut, spin, thrust, deflect. Seagal pressed hard, always moving forward. Jason stepped back carefully, always drawing Seagal into a weaker spot. Then it happened. Seagal swung down with all his strength. But this time, he leaned too far forward. His balance broke just a little. To untrained eyes, it looked fine. But to the masters, it was a mistake. Jason saw it instantly. His Joe swept up in a smooth arc, catching the bakken mid-swing. At the same time, the other end of the Joe pointed right at Seagal's throat. If this were a real fight, it would have ended here. Seagal would have lost. But Jason did not strike. He held the position for a moment, letting everyone see what could have happened. Then he stepped back calmly. The audience gasped. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Everyone knew. Jason had won that exchange. Seagal froze for a moment. His eyes burned with anger. Then he covered it with a smirk. "Cute trick," he said loudly. "But real fights aren't that clean." He lifted his bakken again. "Let's make this more intense." Master Harada stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Seagal, please remember this is just an exhibition." But Seagal ignored him. He attacked again, faster and harder. Jason blocked firmly this time, stopping the bakken in place. For a moment, the 2 men pushed against each other. Seagal strained with strength, his muscles tight. Jason stood calm, his body steady. using little energy. "This is not about winning or losing," Jason whispered softly, meant only for Seagal. "It's about what these arts teach us about ourselves." Seagal pulled back, breathing heavily. His frustration showed in his face. Then he shouted so all could hear. "That's the problem with old martial arts. Too much philosophy, not enough reality." He attacked again, swinging low then high, ending with a hard sideways slash. It was strong but reckless. Jason's jaw met it with precision, guiding the Bakken away and knocking Seagal slightly off balance. Now Seagal was tired. He thought he would crush Jason's calm defense, but instead, he was the one being controlled. The paradox was clear. The attacker was losing ground. The defender was leading. Master Harada saw it. The audience saw it. This was no longer just a fight of weapons. It was a fight of character. Seagal's need to dominate clashed with Jason's calm self-control. The sound of wood hitting wood echoed again and again. The room stayed silent otherwise. Everyone felt they were witnessing something ancient and true. This was not only about who was stronger. It was about who was centered, who was whole, who had learned the deeper lesson of martial arts. After another clash that made Seagal stumble just a little, he stepped back. His breathing was heavier now, and the long wooden stick he held lowered slightly. "You know," he said, trying to sound strong even though his breath came quickly. "In a real fight, there are no rules about using only one weapon." He didn't wait for Jason to answer. Instead, Seagal waved at one of the men standing behind him. That helper quickly grabbed another practice weapon, a tanto, which was a short wooden training knife, and tossed it into the air. Seagal caught it easily with his left hand. Now he held two weapons, the bakken, his wooden stick, and the tanto, his training knife. A murmur spread through the crowd. The whispers were quick and worried. People knew this was not just a small change. It was something very serious. Why? Because in martial arts, respect and rules were important. People did train with two weapons sometimes, but pulling out a second weapon without asking first, right in the middle of a demonstration, broke the usual traditions. It was like breaking a promise. It wasn't just unfair, it was disrespectful. The crowd felt the weight of this moment. Jason didn't change his face. His eyes stayed calm, but his body spoke louder than his face. The way he stood shifted, his posture steady and ready. It showed years of practice, years of facing surprise after surprise. Jason wasn't shocked. He was prepared. "If that is the path you choose," Jason said simply, his voice quiet but firm. Riku, one of the assistants, looked worried. He started to step in, maybe to stop this from going further. But Master Harada, the wise old master, lifted one hand and stopped him. Harada's eyes were sharp and full of thought. He knew that this moment had become much bigger than this simple show of techniques. It wasn't just about a demonstration anymore. It was about meaning, respect, and philosophy. Seagal moved forward again, now with more confidence. The bakken and tanto worked together, swinging and stabbing in ways that were meant to confuse Jason and overwhelm him. His movements were quick and skillful. You could see that Seagal truly knew what he was doing. It looked dangerous. It looked powerful. But Jason changed too. His long staff, the jo, moved with new energy. Before, Jason had mostly used the middle of the staff, keeping things calm and steady. Now the whole length came alive, the ends and the middle working together in flowing defense. The staff spun, blocked, pushed, and twisted, ready for everything. For several exchanges, they danced across the floor. Seagal pressed hard, attacking with two weapons. Jason adapted, calm but sharp, using his single staff against both. The sound of wood hitting would fill the hall. Crack, thwack, smack. The rhythm grew faster, like a drumbeat played by two people who understood music in their bones. The audience leaned forward, their eyes wide. They were not just watching, they were holding their breath. And then came the moment people would talk about again and again. Seagal launched a carefully planned attack. His bakken swept sideways, fast and strong, aiming for Jason's ribs. At the very same time, the tanto in his left hand thrust straight toward Jason's middle. It was a perfect combination, the kind of move that usually forced a fighter to choose. Block one and get hit by the other. Everyone thought Jason was trapped, But Jason did not do what anyone expected. Instead of stepping back or trying to block both wildly, Jason stepped into the attack. His jaw spun in a tight spiral, like a sudden circle of energy. In one single motion, the staff caught the Bak in mid-swing and also redirected the stabbing Tanto. The movement didn't stop there. With that same flowing circle, Jason trapped both of Seagal's arms for a split second, long enough to freeze the attack completely. And then, before anyone could blink, the tip of Jason's staff rose up, stopping right in front of Seagal's face. The entire sequence took less than a heartbeat. It was so fast that many in the audience didn't even realize what had happened until it was already over. What they did see was the result. Seagal frozen in mid-attack. Both his weapons are useless. Jason standing calmly, staff in control, the tip pointing at Seagal's face. For a moment, everything stopped. They looked like statues in a painting, locked together. But this wasn't just any picture. It was a picture of two different ways of thinking. Seagal had chosen force, speed, and aggression. Jason had chosen timing, position, and calm control. Jason stepped back, lowering his staff into a peaceful, vertical stance at his side. He was not attacking. He was not angry. His body spoke clearly. I could have finished this, but I chose not to. Everyone in the arena understood the message. Jason had been in complete control. The fight could have ended whenever he wished. But he chose restraint, showing that real martial arts was not about crushing someone. It was about control, respect, and peace. The entire hall fell into silence. Even the ones who had cheered for excitement, for drama, were quiet now. They realized they had seen something far greater than a contest of moves. For a moment, the line between performance and real combat disappeared. What remained was the truth. Mastery is not about defeating others. It is about mastering yourself. Seagal still stood there, arms extended, weapons frozen. His face was calm, like a mask, but the tightness of his jaw betrayed him. Inside, he was struggling. For a man whose whole career was built on confidence, this was a deep wound. Master Harada's voice finally broke the silence. His words were slow and even, like the steady beat of a drum. Both masters have shown us valuable lessons today. Let us thank them for sharing. The old master's words gave Seagal an honorable way out. Slowly, he lowered his weapons. The mask of performance slid back over his face. He gave a bow, not to Jason, but to the crowd. Always happy to give people something worth watching, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. But there was a difference. His words sounded smooth, but the weight was gone. The confidence had cracked. Hope you all got your money's worth. Jason, meanwhile, carefully placed the Tanto and Bakken back onto the weapon stand. Then he set down his jaw beside them. Each movement was slow, respectful, and precise. No rushing, no boasting, just discipline. He turned and bowed deeply to Master Harada, to the audience, and then most meaningfully, to Seagal himself. Thank you for the opportunity to share perspectives, he said. The crowd erupted in applause, but it wasn't wild cheering like at a sports game. It was deep, respectful clapping. People stood to their feet. Martial arts masters nodded. Everyone understood they had seen something rare, something true. Master Harada gave a small nod, his smile subtle but full of pride. The lesson had been taught, not with lectures or speeches, but with movement and action. That was the language martial artists understood best. Riku returned to the microphone and began announcing the next event, bringing the program back on track. But the energy in the arena had changed. Jason and Seagal stood side by side at the edge of the floor, away from cameras and microphones. Now there were no crowds. Just two men, two martial artists, 2 lives of training. You could have ended it earlier, Seagal said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Jason gave a small nod. That wasn't the point. Then what was the point? Jason paused, choosing his words with care, to show that martial arts, at its best, isn't about who wins or loses. It's about how we conduct ourselves. Seagal's face remained guarded, but in his eyes, something shifted. Not acceptance, not yet, but a crack appeared in the wall he had built around himself. Before anything more could be said, his entourage stepped forward, surrounding him. They pulled him away, helping him slip back into his usual role, the confident, untouchable star. But everyone who had seen the exchange knew something inside had changed. The storm had passed, but it left behind clarity, a reminder that true power speaks loudest through restraint. The expo continued. Demonstrations followed one after another, but whispers filled the crowd like ripples spreading from a stone in still water. People replayed the fight in their minds, telling each other what they saw. On social media, clips were already spreading. Some said, "Did you see how Seagal pulled out that knife without warning? That was disrespectful." Others argued, Seagal was the only one fighting real. Statham was too cautious. An older judo teacher shook his head. "That is exactly the point," he told his students. "A real fight isn't about showing off. It's about what works, about control, not flash." Conversations like this filled the hall. People debated. Some sided with Seagal, others with Jason. But beneath the words, everyone knew they had witnessed something more than entertainment. On stage, Rika moved the show along. A group of young Aikido students were now tumbling and rolling, practicing their falling techniques. Their bodies flowed across the mats gracefully, replacing the clashing energy with calmness. Backstage, Jason sat quietly, sipping water. His GI, his training uniform, was still neat. Around him, his students buzzed with excitement. "You showed him, Jason," one young fighter said eagerly. "Everyone saw who the real master is." Jason looked up, his face calm. "If that's what you believe, then you missed the point." The young man frowned. "But you beat him. Everybody saw it." "This wasn't about beating anyone," Jason said gently. "It was about showing why martial arts matter. Discipline, respect, self-control." "But he was disrespectful," the student protested. "He tried to embarrass you in front of everyone." "Maybe," Jason said thoughtfully. "Or maybe he believed so strongly in his way that he had to prove it. Either way, how I responded wasn't about him. It was about staying true to my principles." Before the young man could answer, a staff member in neat clothes came and bowed. "Mr. Statham," she said politely. "Master Harada asks if you will join him for tea. He is waiting in the private room." Jason stood. "Please tell him I would be honored." As he walked through the backstage area, he noticed the looks people gave him. Staff and other performers bowed slightly as he passed. Something had changed. What was supposed to be a simple demonstration was now a story people would retell for years. The private room was calm and traditional. Tatami mats covered the floor, and sliding paper doors blocked out the noise of the arena. Master Harada knelt at a low table, his cane resting beside him. A simple tea set was ready. "Please," Harada said softly, pointing to the cushion across. "Join me." Jason removed his shoes, bowed, and sat properly. They were silent at first. Harada's hands moved carefully, preparing the tea with slow, graceful precision. It turned a simple act into art. "Your demonstration today," Harada finally said, his voice accented but clear, "was not planned, but perhaps that was what was needed." Jason accepted the tea bowl with both hands, bowing. "I regret that it became a confrontation," he said quietly. "That goes against what I believe martial arts should be." Harada nodded. "Sometimes the river must pass around a stone to continue its journey. The confrontation is not sought, but neither can it always be avoided." They sipped the tea together in silence. Finally, Harada looked at Jason with wise eyes. "You know," he said, "I have watched martial arts change through my long life. When I first began training in martial arts, back in the 1940s, things were very different from what most people think of today. We did not train just so we could fight others. We did not spend all our time learning how to beat an opponent in a contest or a match. No, the real reason we trained was something else. We trained to build ourselves. The main goal was not to win against other people. The main goal was to slowly improve, step by step, day by day. If you could become just a little bit better than you were yesterday, then you were succeeding. That was the heart of training." Jason listened to these words and nodded his head with respect. "Yes," he said softly, "that is still the heart of true martial arts practice. At least, that's how it should be." He paused for a moment, then continued. But as martial arts spread across the world, things started to change. As they became sports, shows, and big businesses, something important shifted. For many people, the outer shape of martial arts stayed, but the inner spirit was watered down. Sometimes, it was even lost completely. Master Harada's eyes, though aged, were still sharp. He looked at Jason carefully and said, "Not for everyone. Not all have lost it." Jason gave a little smile. "I've tried my best to remain true to what my teachers taught me. I have not always done it perfectly, but I try to keep their lessons as my guiding star, something that shows me the way." "It showed today," Harada replied with a kind voice. "Not only in your techniques, though they were indeed impressive. What truly showed was your restraint, your ability to hold back. It showed your respect for the art and for your opponent, even when that opponent did not give the same respect to you." Jason bowed his head a little in thanks, but before he could respond, a sudden noise from outside interrupted them. There was a commotion in the hallway. Voices rose, sounding like protest or argument. Then, without the usual polite announcement, the sliding door opened wide. A very large man stepped into the doorway, his tall body filling the frame. It was Seagal. He had already changed out of his martial arts uniform. Now he wore his usual all-black street clothes, the same kind of outfit he often wore as his trademark. "Excuse me for interrupting," Seagal said. His tone was half apologetic and half defiant, as though he wasn't sure if he should be sorry or proud. "They told me I wasn't allowed to come back here, but I thought that rule didn't apply to me." Master Harada's expression did not change. His face remained calm and neutral. "Mr. Seagal," he said politely, "would you care to join us for tea?" The invitation clearly surprised Seagal. He had expected to be resisted, maybe even thrown out. Instead, he was welcomed. After a small pause, he nodded. Slowly, he took off his shoes and stepped inside. When he knelt at the low table, his movements were a bit stiff and awkward. They did not have the graceful flow that he had shown earlier during the martial arts demonstration. This suggested that, even though he had studied Aikido for many years, he was still not completely familiar with Japanese customs. The room became very quiet. It was not an angry silence, but an uncomfortable one. Harada continued preparing tea with slow, calm movements. Jason sat still, his body relaxed but his mind alert. He was watching to see why Seagal had chosen to come back. At last, Seagal broke the silence. "I wanted to say," he started, but then stopped. He seemed to struggle with the words. His pride was clear on his face, but something else was there too. Something that looked like respect, or maybe simply the need to save face after what had happened earlier. Finally, with obvious effort, he spoke. "Your staff work was solid. Not my style, but solid." Jason nodded slightly. "Thank you. Your sword techniques showed many years of dedicated practice." Once again, silence filled the room. The only sound was the quiet, soothing noises of Harada preparing another bowl of tea. At last, the old master spoke. His voice was steady and filled with wisdom from many decades of teaching. "In Japan, we have a word called ma," Harada said. "It means the space between things, the pause between notes in music, the pause between movements in training, the pause between fighters in combat. This space is not empty. No, it is full of meaning and potential. It is in this space that true understanding often lives." He carefully handed a tea bowl to Seagal. His movements were exact and graceful, following the old tradition. "Perhaps," he said, "there's value in exploring the ma between your different approaches to martial arts." Seagal accepted the tea with both hands. His motions were clumsy, but he tried to show respect. "With all respect, Master Harada," Seagal said, "I didn't come here for philosophy. I came because—" He trailed off again. Clearly, this conversation had pushed him outside his comfort zone. Seagal was used to being the one in control, the one who set the tone of the room. Here, in this calm traditional place, that control had been taken away, because something happened earlier that didn't go the way you expected, Jason suggested softly. Seagal's eyes narrowed. Then he gave a short nod. "Yes, something like that." I've been doing martial arts demonstrations for decades. I know how they're supposed to go. Perhaps, Harada said gently, but it went exactly as it needed to. The three men sat quietly once more. Outside the walls, the noise of the martial arts expo continued. Announcements over speakers, applause from crowds, and the steady hum of thousands of people moving about. But inside the reception room, time felt different. It felt slower, quieter, and more thoughtful. You could have made me look bad out there, Seagal finally admitted, turning to Jason. Really bad. But you didn't. That was never my purpose, Jason replied calmly. Then what was? Seagal demanded. Because from my view, it looked like a contest. For you, maybe it was, Jason answered carefully. For me, it was a chance to show that martial arts, at its best, isn't about defeating others. It's about mastering yourself. Seagal gave a small scoff, some of his usual bravado returning. That's fine for philosophy class, but in the real world, people want to know who's better, who wins. That's always the bottom line. Is it? Harada asked gently, his voice not challenging, but curious. Or is that just a story we have allowed to become the main one? Look outside, Seagal said, gesturing toward the arena. People didn't pay to see meditation and self-improvement. They came for action. They came to see conflict and resolution. That's reality. Some came for the show, yes, Jason agreed. But others came for learning, for inspiration, and for connection to traditions that carry deeper meaning. Seagal shook his head. He still did not agree, but he seemed a little less dismissive than before. Maybe, but you can't deny what got everyone's attention. It was the moment things turned real. At that moment it wasn't just a routine anymore. Authentic, Harada corrected kindly. Not simply confrontational. What the audience responded to was not just conflict. It was the truth, the honest expression of principles through action. Seagal grew quiet. He slowly turned the tea bowl in his hands, clearly deep in thought. For a man who always showed confidence, this moment of reflection was unusual. My first Aikido teacher, Seagal finally said after a long pause, used to say the art was about reconciling the world, not conquering it. Somewhere along the way, I may have focused on other things. The admission hung in the air. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from someone who usually seemed invulnerable. The path of martial arts is long, Harada said kindly. We all wander from it sometimes. What matters is not that we never leave it, but that we recognize when we have strayed, and that we find our way back. Outside, the sounds of the expo shifted again. The announcer called out the day's final demonstration, and applause rose from the audience. The lights shining through the paper screens grew golden as late afternoon set in. I should get back out there, Seagal said, putting the tea bowl down and beginning to rise. My fans will wonder where I went. Of course, Harada said, bowing slightly. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. Seagal hesitated. Something was still unsettled in his expression. He looked at Jason. For just a moment, the mask of cool confidence slipped. Would you really have one if it had been real? He asked. It was more than a question about fighting. It carried layers of meaning, about ego, about legacy, and about the stories we tell ourselves to keep our sense of identity. Jason looked straight at him, calm and steady. In true martial arts, the goal isn't to win against others. It's to overcome yourself. By that measure, we are all still in the fight. Seagal held his gaze for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not complete acceptance, but the first crack in the armor of pride he had worn for decades. Without another word, he stood, bowed properly to Harada, and gave Jason a small nod before leaving the room. When the door closed, Harada let out a gentle breath. An interesting man, he said softly. Much talent, much conflict. We all have battles, Jason replied. Some are just more visible than others. Harada nodded, his wise eyes glowing with the light of many years of understanding. Today, I believe many people saw something deeper than techniques. They saw the spirit of true martial arts, not explained through lectures, but shown through action and choice. I hope so, Jason said. In the end, that's what matters. Not who defeats whom, but what values we show along the way. Indeed, Harada agreed, raising his tea bowl slightly. The loudest lessons are often taught in silence. Jason was walking toward his car. He had just finished a busy day at the big martial arts expo. His steps were steady, but his mind was full of thoughts about what had happened earlier. Suddenly, he noticed something near the special door that only important guests were allowed to use. Standing there was Steven Seagal. Steven was surrounded by reporters, cameras flashing, microphones sticking out like curious little birds. He was talking loudly, his voice full of confidence. "I always knew this would make people talk," Steven was saying. "When you put two legends in the same place, everyone expects sparks to fly. Fireworks." Jason slowed down. He wasn't sure if he should keep walking to his car or stop. He saw Steven wave at him. Here he is, the man himself. Steven called out so everyone could hear. "Jason, come here. These folks want the inside scoop about our little demonstration today." For a short moment, Jason thought about just smiling politely and walking away. But then, he noticed something in Steven's eyes. Yes, there was still that little spark of challenge, almost like a dare. But there was also something else. Maybe a hint that Steven really wanted peace, maybe even respect. Jason nodded slowly and walked over. "I'd be happy to share some thoughts," he said calmly. "But I think it's important we explain what happened correctly." "Absolutely," one reporter said eagerly. "Would you say it was a real competition between two different fighting styles?" Jason shook his head gently. "No, it wasn't a competition. It wasn't about who was stronger or who would win. It was a demonstration, a way to show principles. Martial arts are not just about fighting. They are about values and choices. They are about different priorities." Steven gave a laugh, but it was a laugh that didn't feel quite real. "Come on, Jason. People want to know who would win in a real fight. That's what martial arts has always been about. Who is the toughest?" Jason didn't raise his voice. His tone was soft but steady, like a calm river. "Is that really what martial arts are about? Or is that just a story that sells tickets and makes movies? In my experience, real martial arts are about something deeper. They are about building character. They are about discipline, respect, and always working to improve yourself." As the conversation went on, Jason noticed something interesting. Sometimes, Steven's movie star mask slipped. His eyes softened. His voice grew quieter, and the real martial artist showed up. Not the action hero from films, but the man who had once loved art for its purity. When the reporters finally left, Steven leaned close and spoke in a quieter voice. "We should grab a drink sometime. Talk about the old days, before social media, before viral videos, before all this nonsense." Jason gave a small smile. "I'd like that. Maybe tomorrow, after the demonstrations." Steven nodded. For just a moment, relief crossed his face. "I know a place," he said. "Private. Good sake." The second day of the expo dawned clear and bright. The sun painted the sky golden as the city slowly woke up. By 7 a.m., Jason was already at the gymnasium. He was moving gracefully through his personal training routine in one of the small practice rooms. His movements were steady and precise. Kick, block, strike, breathe. It was the same ritual he had followed for many years. He trained like this, whether he was alone in a quiet room or standing in front of thousands of spectators. Soon, Master Harada entered. The old master's steps were slow but strong, and his eyes carried wisdom. "Your demonstration yesterday," Harada said softly, "has created much discussion among the young practitioners. They have many questions." Jason paused to wipe the sweat from his brow. "Questions are good," he replied. "That's how we grow." Master Harada nodded. "The most interesting questions are not about techniques. They are not asking, 'How did Jason move his hand?' or 'What kick did he use?' Instead, they are asking about choice. Why did you choose restraint when Steven provoked you? Why did you show respect when he showed disrespect?" Jason smiled faintly. Because martial arts is not about ego. It is about control. It is about choosing the right path, even when the wrong one feels tempting. Later that morning, the gymnasium filled with spectators. The air buzzed with excitement. People whispered to each other, pointing at Jason as he walked through the preparation area. Some demonstrators came up to him, bowing slightly, showing more respect than the day before. Riku, the announcer, called his name. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jason." The audience leaped to their feet, clapping and cheering. A standing ovation. Jason could feel their energy, their respect, their hope. "Yesterday," Jason began once the applause quieted, "many of you saw an unplanned demonstration. It made people talk. Today, I want to share something more. I want to show what traditional martial arts give us. Not just techniques, not just fancy moves, but lessons for life. The principles that guide not just our bodies, but our character." As he spoke, the crowd grew silent. Their eyes were locked on him, not with simple curiosity, but with true interest. They wanted to know, to understand. Jason moved through his demonstration with calm grace. He explained each move, then connected it to a lesson: discipline, respect, self-control, kindness. The audience didn't just watch, they learned. That evening, as promised, Jason met Steven at a traditional izakaya, a small Japanese restaurant tucked away on a quiet side street. The lanterns outside glowed warmly, and the wooden door creaked softly as Jason entered. Steven was already there, sitting in a private room. This time, there was no entourage, no flashing cameras, no reporters. Just Steven. They sat together, sharing sake in comfortable silence. Finally, Steven spoke. "You know," he said slowly, "I wasn't always like this." He waved vaguely at himself, at the persona he carried. "When I started in Aikido, it was pure. It was about the art, about effectiveness, yes, but also about something more, something real." He shook his head. "But Hollywood, it rewards arrogance. It turns confidence into pride. It turns skill into a spectacle. Before you know it, you're not yourself anymore. You're just a character, a mask." Jason listened quietly, nodding. He understood. The world often pushed people to become something they were not. Their conversation stretched late into the night. They talked about technique, about training, about the beauty of their arts. They talked about how hard it was to stay true in a world that only cared about image. For the first time, there was no challenge, no arrogance. Only two martial artists sharing their hearts. The last day of the expo came with a different feeling. The nervous energy of the first day was gone. Now there was anticipation, hope, and excitement. A special panel discussion had been added for the closing ceremony. Jason and Steven would sit together with other great masters. The topic: tradition and innovation in martial arts. Steven surprised many people with his calm words. "Martial arts has always evolved," he admitted. "The traditions we hold today were once innovations themselves. The question isn't about choosing one over the other. The question is, how do we keep both with honesty and integrity?" Jason smiled and added, "The techniques may change to fit our times, but the core principles do not. Discipline, respect, continuous growth, using our skills wisely. These are the roots of martial arts, and they last forever." The audience listened carefully. This was not just entertainment anymore. It was wisdom. When the panel ended, Riku invited all the masters on stage. One by one they joined, until Jason and Steven stood side by side. The audience couldn't contain themselves. A roar of applause filled the gym. Everyone rose to their feet. A second standing ovation. Master Harada stepped forward for the final words. His eyes, deep with age and wisdom, swept across the crowd. "In martial arts," he said, "we speak of Mushin, the no-mind state. It is when movements flow naturally, without ego, without fear. This cannot be forced. It happens only when the fighter forgets about winning or losing, about pride or shame. It happens when the heart is free." He turned to Jason and Steven. "What we have seen these past days is more precious than any stage performance. We have seen how martial arts principles live in real choices, real respect, real character." The gym was silent for a moment, and then the applause came again, stronger than before. Outside the gymnasium, Jason and Steven stood together. The air was cool, the night sky filled with stars. They looked at each other, not as rivals, but as fellow travelers on the same path. They shook hands firmly. So, Stephen said with a new lightness in his voice. Same time next year? Jason smiled. I'll be here. Maybe with less drama, more substance. Stephen smirked, but this time, the smirk carried warmth. Speak for yourself. Drama sells tickets. And substance builds character, Jason replied. Stephen nodded thoughtfully. Maybe we need both, in the right balance. From a distance, Master Harada watched quietly. His heart was at peace. The expo had done its greatest work, not by showing flashy kicks or breaking boards, but by teaching everyone what true martial arts really meant. It was about taming the ego. It was about serving something greater than yourself. The storm of challenge and tension had passed. What remained was not destruction, but clarity. For those who truly listened and watched, they had seen something rare, a glimpse of true mastery.